So China's got pretty bad geography, but they also have a demographic collapse issue that seems
Worst
like,
in the world.
and I'm going to do a whole show on demographic collapse, so we can just be brief with it and do like a 10,000-foot overview. But this is the worst. You said the worst demographic collapse in the world, and that I assume that even includes Russia, which is currently throwing all of its any young man it can get into a war that it's not going to win.
It doesn't just include Russia; it includes the Black Death.
Oh wow!
It's like the worst ever. Part of this is policy. You're familiar with the one-child policy. You do that for 40 years, you start running out of 30-year-olds. That's how math works. But most of it just has to do with development. When the United States started industrializing and urbanizing, we started back in the early 1800s. And so we have had generations to adapt to a more urbanized environment. And so we have this middle step where we went from farms to small towns to big towns to cities, and the cities have suburbs. And so there's always been a degree of elbow room put into the American model, which lowers the opportunity cost of having children. China didn't start to urbanize until 1980. And then they did it all at once. So people in a single generation went from living on a subsistence farm to a high-rise condo. And so they went from having 7 kids to 1 kid in 1 generation. The one-child policy was on top of that. And now that it's been more than 40 years, they don't have a lot of people aged under 40. There's no one left to have the next generation. So this was always going to be the last generation for the People's Republic. It was always going to be a 2-generation experience total. But it's happened so fast that we don't even have an economic theory developed. Humankind does not have an economic theory for what would allow the Chinese economy to function in 2030. It's that far gone.
Really? Look, when I hear things like that, I go, okay, well, if people in the U.S. are having fewer kids, it's not that bad. Also, we have immigration, right? We say, hey, we need more young, skilled laborers. Come on in. And we offer a bunch of, a J1 or an H1B? I always forget what these visas are. And we get a bajillion applicants, and tech companies in Silicon Valley and companies all over New York and elsewhere just pick from the cream of the crop, and the problem is kind of solved, isn't it?
In the United States, we are a large population, 330 million. In order to round out our younger age groups, we really need to bring in about 2 to 4 million immigrants a year. And we're well under that right now, and that is something that will come back to bite us again and again and again in the decades to come. But we're also a settler society. None of us are actually from here, and so the United States is capable politically of sustaining large volumes of immigration for an extended period of time. Just now is not one of those moments.
Native Americans are going to email me and be like, actually, and look, most of us are not actually from here. How's that?
Fair enough. Most of our descendants are not from here.
Right.
Or most of our antecedents, excuse me.
Right, antecedents, yeah.
Immigration can be part of our solution. There's a lot of complications in that conversation, politically, logistically. That's a different conversation we can get into if you want to. But the United States is the largest economy in the world with the greatest upward mobility from people from the lower classes to the higher classes, and the attractiveness of that system, especially since it's mostly free, is robust. And you're right, that when we do decide to have an open immigration system, we usually have no problem drawing in people, and that's before you consider what's about to happen to the wider world, where the delta between the U.S. and everyone else is going to be huge. So that is...
We'll get to that in a second. Yeah. We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
I definitely want to hear about that. I'm curious, though, that people will say, well, how come China can't just change their immigration policy and bring in a bunch of skilled people? They might even be able to offer better incentives than the United States. I disagree with that statement, and I'm pretty sure you do as well.
I would say there's 3 reasons that won't work. Number 1 is scale. The United States has over 300 million people. The Chinese have about 1.3 billion. So to move the needle, you don't just need to bring in 3 times as many people. You need to bring in 10 times as many people under age 40. It's not clear that there are enough people that are potentially migrant to salvage just China, assuming no one else moves anywhere else. Number 2, the United States has has developed an interesting reputation of late of being a little bit racist, with white people being a little sketchy. But in China, which is 90% Han Chinese, they are blindingly racist to anyone who is not Han. And to think that there are going to be incentives that'll draw people, especially in numbers, to the PRC is ridiculous, even before you consider the disconnect in terms of economic activity. But third, there's the governing system. You know, the US may be a flawed democracy, but a democracy it still is. China is a country where you are welded into your room when there's a health crisis. Just the degree, the casual dismissal of the very concept that private citizens have agency or interests is something that does not attract migrants.
Yeah, if I'm looking for a place to move, my life would have to be pretty bad. Well, first I'd apply to a place like the US or Europe because I can walk around freely. My life would have to be really bad to go, okay, I know that people die in fires from being welded into their house, and I know that they read all of my messages on my phone. I mean, I would have to be in a place like maybe Guatemala or Honduras, in a poor area where drug cartels and criminals are running roughshod over my physical safety in order to find a place like China better than my current lifestyle.
Well,
so
the
calculation just
Cuba,
changes.
Mexico, or the United States first.
Right, of course, yeah, of course. So that's a problem then, and I think people don't realize that you can't just flip an immigration switch even in places with the infrastructure and the culture of immigration. It's hard to change. In a place that doesn't ever have it, it's going to be it's going to be kind of a Herculean task.
Yeah,
to
China
fill that
has
gap.
never had net inward migration. It's always been outward, people trying to get out, not people trying to get in.
Huh. Did not know that. I assumed at some point they would have had inward migration, but maybe you have to go back like 2,000 years or something like that to find that.
Now, there is migration
Wow.
within the Chinese system. People forget that China is not a traditional nation state. It is an empire, and they have expanded out and conquered other groups, and you do get migrant from those poorer minorities into the urban centers. But again, you can only do that once, because then you've hollowed out the countryside, and that is what has happened writ large throughout the entire system at this point.
Yeah, there's a whole. I've been studying China for years. There's this whole. It's called hukou, and it's like almost like a culture of. I mean, this means a lot of different things, but there's a whole culture of young people, and by young I mean 20 to 50, move from the countryside to the nearest city, work in a factory, leave their kids in the countryside with grandma and grandpa to essentially be raised, see their parents occasionally, money gets sent back, but nobody goes, all right, we're done, we're going to move back to the countryside. Once those older folks die, that village just starts to hollow out, and that's the end of it.
And we've seen that across the system. The average age in some of these cities is upwards of 50% higher than what it is in the cities.
Yeah, that completely makes sense, that the age is just completely skewed.